Good afternoon, everyone. It's John. Hope everyone is having a great week so far and had a great weekend. We're week 6, and it's kind of hard to believe that we are already this far along in the class. So it's gone by pretty quickly for me. Hopefully, you're getting some value out of it. I've had a few students reach out to me recently, just asking questions about legal analysis and the elements of a negligence claim and some of just related to some of the assignments that we've had recently. So, would definitely want to encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions. You have my contact info. Feel free to email me. Feel free to call me, and we'll arrange a time to go over some stuff. Because I know this stuff is not instinctive. It's kind of the whole analytical process of breaking down a claim into its respective elements and then identifying the facts that are applicable to those particular elements, applying them, coming up with a reasonable conclusion based on the analysis is not easy. And so definitely please feel free to reach out and we can talk through anything you may want to. So anyways, I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think just throughout the whole class, but particularly this week, related to discrimination, demand letters, and I sort of predicted that a lot of people would just instinctively choose to represent or advocate for the person that is alleging discrimination because they're a more sympathetic figure. And that is what happened. And I think maybe for future classes, I'll split it up and make half of them represent the hospital, half of them represent the employee. But you guys all did a great job. So keep up the great work. I did want to just bring up, this isn't going to be very long, I just want to bring up a couple of things that I noticed and gleaned from this week's reading, particularly in Chapter 11 and Appendix A. Two things. One related to clinical trials, the second related to ethics, back to the ethics discussion that we had in week 1. But related to clinical trials, some of you may be working for institutions, hospitals, or other healthcare providers that are involved in clinical trials. I've represented a handful of medical groups that have engaged in clinical trials, both from just a provider on the provider side, but also from the investigator side. So it's actually quite an interesting process, very cumbersome, highly regulated area that is really easy to get wrong if you don't have a lot of experience in it. So it takes a lot. It takes years, decades for a drug or a procedure or device potentially to make its way through the clinical trial process to actually being marketed. And human study clinical trials is really highly regulated because these regulations, these rules are designed to protect the humans, the participants. And so it's regulated by the FDA, by if their Medicare is involved, certainly by the Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, among state agencies, and anyways, there are a lot of agencies that have their hand in this. But a couple of takeaways in my experience with clinical trials. I just recently closed up an investigation for a client related to some allegations of a former employee of some holes in their process and improprieties related to enrolling patients in clinical studies. And as I was going through this and researching and conducting these interviews and investigation, the thing that really was most predominant to me was the importance of informed consent. And again, like I said, these rules and regulations are designed to protect the participant, and there's no greater protection than actually having actual informed consent, which there are FDA rules, there are ICH guidelines, IRB, Institutional Review Board, which is a kind of a governing body over a particular study, that has to approve everything. The informed consent process, according to the FDA, starts with marketing of the study. And so they will regulate and govern how the study is marketed. The IRB has to approve all marketing materials. The FDA has rules related to and the ICH guidelines, which are international guidelines on clinical studies, have rules related to how, if you give a patient, give a potential enrollee informed consent documents, what those should contain. They should obviously be understandable, not a lot of legal jargon or medical jargon. They should be well explained. That explanation should be well documented, and then you should give the individual a certain amount of time to consider their participation in the study after everything's been explained and they've been given that documentation. So a lot of rules related to informed consent. There's a great website. I'll put it in the announcement when I post this video, but it's fda.gov/for-patients/approvals/drugs. This is a great website if you're ever curious about kind of the drug development process. That's a great resource for learning more about that. I was just back on the informed consent issue. I was just yesterday approached by a client. I got an email from a client. They want to get involved in a clinical study, just on the provider side, though. They'll just be providing the care to the potential human subjects in the study. And so, of course, my first question is, to what extent will these providers be involved in the informed consent process? Will the study team be involved in that? Will the providers be involved in that? They just need to get a gauge on what their liability is, what their responsibilities and duties will be. And so we're still trying to hammer that out. But that's got to be the first question when this sort of thing comes up, because there are ramifications and consequences for not doing it correctly. Okay, that's enough for clinical trials. If you have any questions, I'll post that website if you're interested in it. I think it's pretty fascinating what that process looks like. The other issue is the issue of ethics is coming up again. You may recall that we reviewed this and discussed this a bit in week 1. But it's coming up again because things like the Terry Schiavo case and euthanasia and things like that are coming up in our reading now. And so, I always find, and I may have said this in week 1, I don't remember, but ethics is a tough topic for me because it is so individualized, right? And ethics is informed by our own personal values and our own beliefs and things like that. And when I think of ethics, I kind of break ethics down into 2 different components. The first, I think, are societal ethics, which we as a society believe just collectively that certain things are wrong, like murder or stealing things or robbing people, and so these ethical values have been codified into law, which makes things like murder illegal, and so that's kind of one extreme. There are other things that I think are more informed by our personal beliefs, things like end of life sort of issues, euthanasia, healthcare as a right versus something that is not a right. Is it an entitlement or not? And so these are things that came up in week 1, but certainly something that we should keep considering, particularly in light of the reading. You may recall that first week discussion about the healthcare vaccines, and you have a certain limited number of vaccines for a larger population. How are you going to distribute those under the different ethical theories? Are you going to give them to the young people? Are you going to give them to those who may clinically need them the most, the elderly or the sick or the babies? Or anyways, this is up to each individual to decide. I think the Terry Schiavo case is either in this week's reading or next week's reading. But it's certainly mentioned in your text, and that was an interesting case out of Florida. Certainly not the only case of its kind, but one that received a lot of publicity and press. But it brings up a really big ethical dilemma that we should consider and discuss. So, anyways, the other thing is the euthanasia is an interesting one, only because, it's a big deal. But Oregon, if you look up the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, I encourage you to just Google that and see what comes up. But it's if you're not familiar with it, you'll see all the requirements and rules surrounding the Oregon's recognized right to die for those that are essentially critically ill or within a certain amount of time, and so look that up. Colorado actually, it was last year or the year before, had a similar sort of law on the ballot that was defeated. And there may be other states, Oregon for sure. There may be other states that have similar laws, but not many. But anyways, that's something to think about, and just those are issues that are going to be informed by our own ethics and our own personal values, like much of healthcare is. So anyways, please, again, I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, want to discuss anything. I will post that FDA website included in the announcement that includes this video, and hope you have a phenomenal week 6. Everyone have a great one.